So here we are on Halloween. Well, it's October 30th. We're doing a poker run. Beautiful day. Couldn't get any better. We actually really lucked out because it started raining just the next day after the event. Hardly any dust. Good traction. So I'm here with my buddy. He's on a Beta 300, 2022 model, and I've got my 2022 WR450F. This bike is actually really good for the woods, really good for single track, really good for open trails. Personally, for me, I feel that this is a great bike for my riding style. Now, when things do get a little bit tight, like what you're seeing here, it just requires a little bit more clutch modulation, but it does have. But it does have a pretty low first gear, so when things start getting a little bit slower, you're not slipping the clutch like you would on a race bike. This bike has been uncorked. I took out the snorkel that was in the intake. I removed the little baffle thing in the tailpipe. It still has a spark arrestor, but I took out the baffle part, which was tiny little thing. I could barely put my finger in it. So you can see right here in the rocky stuff, it does pretty well. And this is downhill, so I'm not using any of the power, but it just requires just one finger on the clutch, just kind of slipper, and you're good to go. It's really not that hard. A 450 is a lot to handle in a lot of this tight stuff, but I've got the tune on mine. I got the GYTR ECU.
Take my hoodie off.
So it's got the mild to wild. I got the map switch, that goes with it. I don't have the tuning app, but so it just comes with the two preloaded maps. There's a mild map and there's a wild map. And honestly, I just run around in mild all day, because when you put it in wild, this thing will rip your arms off. So mild map really smooths it out. Doesn't wear you out so bad. You can really lug this thing down. It does really well. WR comes with a fan from factory, so when you're doing a lot of this slower stuff, you're not getting any wind speed. The fan does kick on quite a lot. 4 strokes get warmer than the 2 strokes do. So having that fan is absolutely necessary. This thing hardly goes through any water. I barely put a splash in it after a full day riding. It wasn't that hot out on this day. It was in the 70s, maybe 80s. So it was pretty awesome weather. But slow speed stuff. It did get pretty warm a few times. But fan kicked on for a little bit and then turned back off. I never saw it boiling over or nothing. Here we got a little uphill. 450s are awesome for climbing. There's so much torque, so much power, just ready to go. Even in the mild map, you twist that throttle all the way and it's gonna pull to the moon. But on the mild map, it really smooths out the bottom, say half throttle, and it really is. It's not even like it's not even like an RPM thing. It kind of has a lot to do with RPM, but I noticed a big input is the throttle position. So it really kind of signs off right before mid throttle or third throttle. probably, I'd say half throttle, it really signs off. But once you get past that and crack her open, she starts to really take off. So there is a little bit of a dead spot in the mild map, but you hardly ever notice it unless you're doing a hill climb where you're kind of holding that half throttle, you know. But I put my map switch on my left finger, my left thumb, and I can click her in a wild whenever I want on the fly. I didn't run it in wild all day. I left her in mild all day. Suspension on this bike is great. I have zero complaints. I'm used to riding older, kind of worn out bikes as it is, so any suspension is better than what I'm used to. Some people might think it's a little stiff. However, I do like to ride pretty fast, and this bike really comes to life once you get moving. But even in the slow speed stuff, I find it absorbs the bumps quite well. I think if I took a little bit of air out of my tires, it might not bounce as bad in the back. I'm still rocking stock tubes, so I have about 12-14 psi because I don't like spinning tires. Because I've had flats too many times by having too little of air pressure in the rear. So tubeless would be nice, but at the moment I don't have it, so it's just a little bit harsh. But you just get used to how the bike is, and you just ride it. This thing is a blast to whip through the woods. You can really throw it down. It does weigh 262 pounds, they say, full of fuel. So you are a little bit on the heavier side. But honestly, that's only 5-10 pounds heavier than a lot of the two-strokes these days. Those things full of fuel, they're pushing 255 pounds. So it's really not that much heavier. And honestly, when you're moving this bike, it's light, it's chuckable. I don't feel that it's heavy at all. When I compare it to my old RM250 two-stroke, that thing full of fuel is maybe 240 pounds, maybe 235 or something like that. But honestly, you can still chuck it. You can still throw down. The weight's really not an issue. It probably has a lot to do with how the air intake is up high and the fuel kind of sits low underneath your seat. So it really lowers the center of gravity. I think that has a huge part of why this bike feels lighter than it is. Once you're stopped, you have to pick this bike up, then yeah, you can feel the weight, but like I said, it's really not that much heavier than anything else that you ride these days. So I don't feel that weight is an issue on these bikes. Touching back again about gearing, first gear is pretty low on this bike. You almost never need it. If you're doing any kind of movement, you're in second gear, maybe even dabbling into third gear for a lot of this stuff. Only once it gets right down into this tight single track where you're getting real close to the trees and the rocks are getting bumpy. That's when you clicker down into first. Compared to, say, a race 450, I'd say that my second gear is probably only a little bit taller than a first gear on, say the YZ450F. Not that I've ridden that one. I have ridden, a Honda 450Rs and a Kawasaki KX450. The race bikes, and all race bikes have really tall firsts, and then every gear after that is really close together. This one, again, first gear is half of what the first gear is on a race bike. Second gear is not much higher than first, not quite the same as second. I'd say third gear is probably the same as a race bike. That's where they would meet. Fourth gear starts to get a little bit taller. and fifth gear is a really tall gear on this bike. If we're on fire roads and you're just kind of cruising with everybody else, a lot of times I'm not even in fifth gear because it's so tall. It's almost lugging, so I have to just kind of ride it in fourth. Once it really opens up and you're on a straight road, then yeah, you can use fifth gear. I have ridden this bike on the road just to get to a trail, and I'd say it cruises in fifth gear pretty comfortably at 55 miles an hour. There's plenty of leg to go. Even 70 miles an hour you wouldn't even be over revving it very much. It probably has the gears to go. Who knows? I haven't tried it, so. But I think the gearing on this bike is phenomenal. I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons that this bike is easy to ride in the woods, is because when it does get tight, I can click it all the way down, and I have that gear that's much lower than your traditional 450. So it does make it pretty easy. Or two strokes, you can lug them right down. Even if you're a gear too high, that they will still lug right down into nothing, which does make them easy to ride when it gets slow. When you're riding these new two strokes, old two strokes, old carbureted two strokes, they're not necessarily very easy to ride slow. They like to go fast. So you crack the throttle on an old carbureted two-stroke and that thing just wants to rip your arms off all day. They do lug okay, but not like the new fuel-injected two-strokes, or even this Beta that my buddy's riding. It's a carbureted bike, but it's designed to be, a really luggable, tractorable bike. I barely get to ride it one time, but I did get to feel it out. I felt how the power felt. I didn't really get into the top end. I kind of got high mid, and it doesn't really feel like it wants to be up there. It wants to be kind of tractored. It wants to be, mid-range kind of power. You can kind of tell too, because the pipe is quite a lot smaller on the bike. Even though it is a 300 two-stroke, it doesn't look like it's much bigger than a 125 exhaust pipe. It looks like a miniature 250 pipe, really, but smaller expansion chamber on a two-stroke is going to give you more torque, but it's not going to give you the top end, and that's intentional. That's how they've made that Beta 300 run. So it fits my buddy really well. He is a shorter guy, so it was kind of his own little unicorn bike for him. He loves it. For me, this 450 is, and there are a few spots where if you're only doing the harshest, rockiest stuff, then yeah, a two-stroke would probably be nice. But honestly, as soon as you're moving more than 10 miles an hour, it's this four-stroke, this 450 that Yamaha has made here, and with the mild map that it's got, it is super smooth. It won't rip your arms off unless you really ask it to. It's super easy to ride, and honestly, I could ride this thing all day and barely get tired. I can't say enough about this bike. I've got probably 45, I'd say, engine hours on this thing. It's hard to tell. I can't. It doesn't actually have an hour meter, but I've got over 500 miles on it. I think the hour meter is in the ECU, but I need the tuner app module to actually communicate with the ECU. But that thing's about $500, and it's out of stock everywhere. So I haven't even bothered. But it does have an odometer, and I've just been keeping track of my oil changes and stuff on that. A ride like today, I'm going to change the oil. I'm pretty religious on the oil changes. I've probably changed the oil on this bike 6 times now in the 45 hours that I've put on it. Running AMSOIL. What am I running? 1040? I think that sounds right. I'm not in the shop right now, so I'm not looking at it. But it's definitely been a blast. I've had zero issues with the bike. I ran it about 10 hours corked, and when this bike was corked, it was like a torquey 250, but with zero top end. Like, it would really sign off on the top end. As soon as I uncorked this bike, it just turned into it was a whole other animal. Like I said, I gotta run it mild all day. But yeah, love the bike. It's a great bike. Anyways, peace out.